Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
Thanksgiving always felt less like a holiday and more like a performance in our family, a tired old show where everyone pretended to like each other just long enough to get through dinner without throwing mashed potatoes across the room. I remember walking up the crumbling front steps of the house I had helped keep afloat for years, my hands full of grocery bags that nobody had bothered to offer help with, and thinking, maybe this year will be different. It was a joke, of course, one I kept telling myself out of habit, like a gambler convinced that eventually the odds would swing in his favor. Inside, the house smelled like a cheap candle trying to mask the lingering staleness of old carpet and lost dreams. Mom was in the kitchen barking orders like a drill sergeant on her third cup of gas station coffee, her voice shrill enough to make the windows rattle. Dad was already half asleep in his recliner, TV blaring some football game he wasn't even watching, and Ashley was pacing the living room with her phone glued to her ear, complaining about her ex yet again to some poor soul on the other end. I set the bags down on the counter, unnoticed, and took a deep breath that felt like swallowing broken glass. I guess this is where I should tell you that for the last 10 years, I had been the glue holding this mess together. When Dad got laid off and spiraled into depression, it was me who picked up the bills. When Ashley racked up credit card debt chasing a lifestyle she could never afford, it was me who bailed her out, over and over again. When Mom's car broke down or the roof started leaking or there just wasn't enough to cover the electric bill, I was the one who wrote the checks, quietly and without a word. Not because they asked, but because deep down, I thought that if I just did enough, gave enough, held them up long enough, maybe they would finally see me. Maybe I would finally matter. The dinner table looked like something out of a sad sitcom, all plastic smiles and forced laughter. Linda, that's my mom, though God knows she stopped feeling like 1 year ago, made a big show of carving the turkey like it was some sacred ritual. She handed me a plate piled so high I could barely see over it and gave me a wink like we were sharing some private joke. It was her way of reminding me that no matter how old I got, I would always be the punchline in her little comedy act. Ashley, between chewing with her mouth open and texting under the table, started in about her latest crisis. Her car payment was overdue, her rent was past due, and somehow it was everyone else's fault but hers. Dad nodded along like a bobblehead, never daring to say anything that might rock the boat. I kept my mouth shut, my stomach churning with the effort. It wasn't the first time I wanted to stand up and scream at all of them, to list every bill I had covered, every favor I had done, every time I had swallowed my own pride to keep this family from falling apart at the seams. But I didn't. I never did. Instead, I forced a tight smile and shoveled dry turkey into my mouth, trying to will myself invisible. Maybe if I stayed quiet enough, small enough, I could get through the evening without another scar to add to the collection. And then, right in the middle of Ashley's third sob story about how her life was so unfair, Mom let out this laugh. It wasn't a real laugh, not the kind that bubbles up from something genuine. No, it was sharp and mean, the kind of laugh that slices you clean in half before you even realize you're bleeding. She set down her wine glass, smirking, and said, "God, Tyler, you're nothing but a leech on this family." The words hit like a punch to the gut, knocking the air clean out of my lungs. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard her. Maybe she was joking, the way she sometimes did when she thought cruelty was funny. But the way she looked at me cold, dismissive, like I was something she found stuck to the bottom of her shoe, told me that no, I had heard her just fine. Have you ever been blamed for the very things you sacrificed for? If you have, what would you have done if you were in my shoes? I sat there, frozen, fork halfway to my mouth, as the room went eerily silent. Dad stared at the turkey like it might jump off the plate and save him from having to pick a side. Ashley looked uncomfortable for exactly half a second before her phone buzzed and she went back to texting like nothing had happened. And Mom, Linda, just sat there, smirking like she had finally won some sick little game I never knew we were playing. The rage that bubbled up inside me was slow and steady, not a flash fire, but something deeper, older, like lava pushing its way through the cracks of a long-dead volcano. I wanted to flip the table, smash every plate, every glass, every fake smile that littered the room. I wanted to scream that without me, they would have been homeless 100 times over. I wanted to list every sacrifice, every dollar, every sleepless night spent worrying about their problems instead of my own. But I didn't. I just sat there, letting her words sink deep into the marrow of my bones, branding me with a shame that wasn't even mine to carry. I realized, in that moment, that no matter what I did, no matter how much I gave, it would never be enough. I would always be the scapegoat, the fallback, the punching bag they needed to make themselves feel better about their own failures. And somewhere between my mother's cold laugh and my father's silence, something inside me broke, quietly, invisibly, but completely. Dinner went on like nothing had happened. They laughed, they gossiped, they picked over the remains of the meal like vultures. And I sat there, counting down the minutes, planning my escape, tasting the bitter, metallic tang of anger and betrayal on the back of my tongue. By the time I scraped my plate into the trash and excused myself, pretending I was just tired, I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I was going to walk away from this house, this family, this endless cycle of giving and taking and blaming, and I was never coming back. And next time they found themselves drowning without me, they would have no one left to save them. The thing about public humiliation is that it sticks to your skin like grease, seeping into every pore until you can feel it long after the crowd has stopped watching. I sat there at that creaky, worn-down Thanksgiving table, my fork hovering uselessly above a plate I no longer had the appetite to touch, feeling the weight of 1,000 invisible eyes burning into me. Maybe nobody in that room would remember what Mom said by the time the last bottle of cheap wine was drained and the leftover turkey was packed away, but I would remember it forever. The way a soldier remembers the sound of a gunshot long after the battlefield has gone silent. There was a time, years ago, when I would have laughed it off, played the family clown like I always did, swallowing the hurt because I told myself it was easier than causing a scene. Hell, I had swallowed worse insults from them before, times when Ashley joked that I would die alone because who the hell would marry a guy who still lived at home, times when Dad, in a rare fit of frustration, snapped that if I was so smart, maybe I should have figured out how to get rich instead of working a dead-end job. I had always carried it, dragging it behind me like a bag of broken glass, telling myself it was just part of loving people who didn't know how to love back. But this time was different, and the difference wasn't just the words, brutal as they were, but the way Mom said them with a laugh, like it was the funniest goddamn thing she had ever thought of. Like the idea of me being a parasite on the family, after all I had done for them, was so hilarious it deserved to be the centerpiece of the Thanksgiving feast. Maybe it was the timing, or maybe it was just the slow, grinding accumulation of years spent giving until there was nothing left of me to give, but something inside me cracked, deep and final. As they went back to eating and pretending nothing had happened, I sat frozen in my chair, my mind slipping back through every sacrifice they had never noticed, every small betrayal I had forgiven without even an apology. I thought about the months I covered Ashley's rent when her boyfriend took off with her wallet and her dignity, scraping together money I didn't have because she promised she would pay me back, a promise as empty as her bank account. I thought about the endless hospital bills when Dad's heart gave out 3 winters ago, bills I paid without question because family comes first, even when nobody else seemed to remember that when it came to helping me. I thought about the grocery deliveries I scheduled every month so Mom would never have to admit to the neighbors that she could not afford them herself. She never once said thank you for those bags of food that showed up like magic on the front porch, never once asked who was keeping her stocked in coffee and cigarettes when her pension barely covered the basics. I was the invisible hand propping them up, the ghost in the walls of their crumbling lives, and still, somehow, I was the villain in their story. The more I sat there, staring blankly at the half-empty plates and half-hearted smiles, the more the weight of it all crushed down on me until I could barely breathe under the strain of all that unspoken anger. Every little slight I had brushed off, every time I had convinced myself that I was overreacting, came roaring back with a vengeance, stacking up into a tower of resentment so tall it blotted out the sun. I saw myself clearly for the first time in years, not as the good son or the reliable brother, but as the family scapegoat, the designated dumping ground for every bad mood, every failure, every misplaced dream. And, for the first time in my life, I did not want to stay and fix it. I did not want to make it better, or apologize for things that were never my fault, or hold the weight of a family that had long since stopped seeing me as anything but a crutch they could kick whenever they stumbled. That night, after the dishes were scraped clean and the laughter faded into drunken arguments over who forgot to bring the damn cranberry sauce, I sat alone in my childhood bedroom, staring at the faded posters on the walls and the worn carpet under my feet. And I made a decision so quietly that even I almost missed it. I was done. Done with the silent sacrifices, done with the endless forgiving, done with carrying people who would not lift a finger for me unless it was to point blame. I decided I would not spend another minute living in a house that smelled like old regrets and fresh resentment. I would not keep pouring myself into a family that saw me as a liability instead of a lifeline. The plan came together with frightening clarity, each step snapping into place like gears turning in a long-forgotten machine. Tomorrow morning, before anyone else was awake, I would pack my things, cancel every automatic payment tied to my accounts, and walk out the door without so much as a backward glance. I would leave them to clean up their own mess for once, to feel the absence of the man they had leaned on for far too long without ever once thinking. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the faint sounds of the TV downstairs and the occasional clink of a bottle against the kitchen counter, I felt something I had not felt in years, not sadness, not anger, but a strange, unfamiliar sense of freedom. It scared me, a little, how easy it felt to let go once I allowed myself to imagine a life that did not revolve around their endless needs. But fear was not enough to stop me. Nothing was going to stop me now. The morning light barely crept through the grimy blinds when I woke, though it was hard to tell if I had ever really slept at all, or if I had just lain there all night, half dreaming of the escape I knew was waiting for me. Every noise in the house, every creak of the old floorboards, and every faint groan of the heater sounded louder than usual, like the house itself knew what I was about to do and was trying to guilt me into staying. I sat up slowly, letting the weight of the day settle on my shoulders, and for a long moment, I just sat there, staring around the room that had been mine for nearly 3 decades. A room that had stopped feeling like mine sometime around the year my life had been hijacked by everyone else's disasters. There were boxes stacked against the wall, leftovers from a life spent half moving but never actually leaving, and I began to fill them without ceremony, stuffing clothes and books and the few personal things I had not already lent out or lost to one family emergency or another. Each item dropped into the box felt like shedding another layer of the person they thought I was, the reliable one, the fixer, the mule that never kicked no matter how heavy the load. I packed quickly but carefully, not because I cared about most of this stuff anymore, but because some small, stubborn part of me refused to leave anything behind that they could later use as a weapon against me. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of eerie silence that only falls when everyone is still deeply asleep, drunk on cheap wine and cheap resentments. I moved like a thief, my footsteps soft on the worn carpet, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure someone would wake up and catch me in the act. But no one stirred. No one even turned over in their beds. In a way, it felt fitting. Even in my leaving, I was invisible. I took care of the money next, sitting at the ancient desktop computer in the corner of the dining room, the one I had fixed more times than I could count, navigating through account after account with the grim efficiency of someone disarming bombs. I canceled the credit card I had opened under my name for Ashley when her credit was too bad to get one herself. I turned off the autopay for the electric bill, the water bill, the internet service that Dad spent hours mindlessly scrolling through every day. I severed every financial tie that had bound me to this house, this life, this endless treadmill of giving without ever receiving. Each click of the mouse felt like another chain snapping free from around my throat, and even as a sick sort of guilt gnawed at the edges of my mind, I could not stop. I would not stop. I left no trace, no forwarding addresses, no backup plans. If they wanted to keep the lights on, they would have to figure it out themselves for once. Before I left, I wrote a letter, but not the kind they probably expected. It was not a dramatic confession, not a tear-stained goodbye, not even an angry screed listing every grievance they had ever heaped on my back. It was just a few short lines, printed neatly on a piece of notebook paper, tucked under a magnet on the fridge. Take care of yourselves. I won't be back. Tyler. That was it. That was all I had left to give them. I loaded my boxes into the battered old pickup truck that I had paid off last year with the bonus from a project nobody in the family had even asked me about, and I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, letting the engine rumble in the cold morning air. The house loomed in the rearview mirror, dark and still and unknowing, and for a second, just a second, I wondered if I should go back inside, say something, make it real. But then my phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and I saw Mom's name flashing on the screen, and I knew in my gut that nothing I said would change anything. She would not understand, could not understand, not because she was incapable but because she simply refused to see me as anything but a resource to be mined until there was nothing left. So I let the call ring and ring until it fell into silence, and then I turned the phone off altogether, tossing it onto the seat like it was something rotten I needed to be rid of. Pulling out of the driveway, I felt something strange stir inside me, not joy, exactly, and not peace, but a kind of hollow relief, like stepping out of a burning building and realizing you are still breathing even though the smoke still clings to your clothes. The guilt still gnawed at me, sharp and persistent, whispering that I was a terrible son, a terrible brother, a terrible person for abandoning the people who had depended on me for so long. But another voice, quieter but stronger, reminded me that dependence built on manipulation is not love, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop setting yourself on fire to keep other people warm. As I drove toward the small apartment I had found on the other side of town, a place barely big enough to hold me and my boxes and the battered remains of my patience, I promised myself something I had never dared promise before. I would build a life that was mine alone, a life where I was not the afterthought or the scapegoat or the invisible backbone of a crumbling house of cards. I would find out who I was when I was not busy being everything everyone else needed. And if they called again, if they begged or demanded or guilt me with stories of how hard things had gotten without me, I would not answer. I would let the phone ring, and I would let the silence be my answer. For the first time in a long, long time, the future felt wide open. Terrifying, yes, but open. And I was ready to walk straight into it, no matter what I left behind. The first sign that things were unraveling came just after noon the next day, when I sat in my tiny new apartment, nursing a cup of bitter coffee and trying to pretend that the hollow pit in my chest was just hunger. I had turned my phone back on for the first time since leaving, mostly out of morbid curiosity, expecting maybe a missed call or two, but nothing prepared me for the avalanche of chaos that came pouring through all at once. Missed calls stacked up like bodies in a war zone, frantic voicemails from Ashley, from Mom, even a garbled one from Dad that sounded like he was shouting into the wrong end of the phone. Scrolling through the messages, I pieced together the picture with an almost clinical detachment, as if I were reading about strangers instead of the people who had once been my whole world. The power had gone out at the house sometime around 10 in the morning, cutting off the heat and the lights just as a cold snap was rolling through town. The phones had stopped working an hour after that, Mom's and Dad's both suspended when the family plan I had been quietly paying for behind the scenes was abruptly canceled. Ashley, whose car payment I had been covering for months after her latest financial disaster, found out the hard way that her car had been repossessed when she came outside to an empty driveway. I should have felt guilty, maybe even sick with worry, but instead, A dark, almost cruel satisfaction unfurled in my chest, slow and undeniable. It was not pride or joy, not exactly, more like the grim justice of watching a house of cards finally collapse under the weight of its own rotting foundation. They had leaned on me for so long, taken so much for granted, that it had never even occurred to them what would happen if I stopped holding everything up. They had built their lives on the silent, invisible scaffolding of my sacrifices, and now that scaffolding was gone, stripped away in a single night. I stood by the window, staring out at the cracked parking lot of my new building, and let the memories flood in, one after another, sharp and unforgiving. I remembered being 17 years old, fresh out of high school, when Dad lost his job and the mortgage payments started slipping behind. Mom cried in the kitchen every night, too proud to ask for help, while Dad sat in the dark, staring at the wall like he could will the bills to pay themselves. I got my first job the next week, shelving groceries at a rundown store on the edge of town, and handed over every paycheck without question, convinced that this was what good sons did. I remembered the night Ashley showed up at the house, black eye blooming across her cheek, suitcase in one hand and baby in the other, sobbing that she had nowhere else to go. I cleared out my savings account to get her set up in an apartment, paid her first and last month's rent, stocked her fridge with groceries, and told myself it was worth it just to see her safe. She never paid me back, never even said thank you, and somehow it became understood that every time she fell, it was my job to catch her. I remembered all the times Mom needed something fixed or bought or repaired, all the times Dad needed rides to the doctor or loans to cover just until next payday, all the silent expectations that wrapped around my life like ivy, strangling everything else I might have wanted for myself. Somewhere along the way, being needed became my only identity, and I let it happen because the alternative, the terrifying possibility of being unnecessary, of being truly alone, was too much to face. Until now. The first text from Mom came through just after 2 o'clock, short and furious, the words almost vibrating with anger through the cracked screen of my battered phone. How could you do this to us? No hello, no apology, no acknowledgement of the years I had given up to keep them afloat. Just outrage, pure and blinding, as if I had committed some unforgivable betrayal by choosing myself for once. I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a strange mixture of anger and sadness, like two animals locked in a death match inside my chest. They still did not see it, still could not, or would not understand that I had not destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves, one selfish choice, one unspoken expectation at a time. I had simply stepped aside and let them face the consequences they had been dodging for years. Another text came through a few minutes later, this one from Ashley, all misspelled words and frantic energy. Tyler, WTF, my car is gone. WTF, am I supposed to do now? As if I were still the answer to every problem, still the safety net stretched tight under their reckless lives. As if walking away had not been a decision, but a mistake I needed to rush back and fix. I turned the phone off again without replying, tossing it onto the ratty couch that had come with the apartment, and sat back, listening to the strange, unnerving silence of a space that was truly mine for the first time in my life. No shouting, no crying, no demands, no guilt weighing down the air like a storm cloud ready to burst. Just silence. For a long time, I sat there, staring at the blank ceiling, trying to figure out what I was supposed to feel. Relief? Freedom? Triumph? Guilt? The truth was, I felt all of it, tangled together in a messy, choking knot that would probably take years to untangle, if it ever did. But underneath it all, deeper than the guilt, deeper than the fear, there was something else growing, something small and stubborn and fierce. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, I could build something new from the ashes of all the bridges I had burned. Maybe, just maybe, I could finally learn what it meant to live for myself, not for everyone else. And maybe, though I would never dare to say it out loud, maybe they needed to learn what it felt like to stand on their own 2 feet, even if they had to stumble and fall a few times to get there. As the sun dipped low on the horizon and the streetlights flickered to life outside, I closed my eyes and breathed deep, savoring the air of a life that, for the first time in as long as I could remember, felt like it actually belonged to me. The fallout came faster and messier than I had expected, like a dam finally breaking after years of cracks and patchwork repairs, releasing a flood of anger, guilt, and bitter accusations that swept through my phone, my email. Even my front door in the form of letters and angry knocks from people I barely spoke to anymore. It started with the texts, endless strings of words dripping with disbelief and blame, like they had all gotten together to decide the best way to rewrite the story and cast me as the villain in their new, more convenient version of events. Mom's first few messages were sharp and short, stabbing at me with phrases like "after everything we did for you" and "how could you turn your back on your family like this?" As if the years of sacrifice had been a two-way street instead of a dead-end road where only I ever traveled. Then came the longer messages, the rambling, teary ones where she painted herself as the broken-hearted mother abandoned by the ungrateful son she had given everything for, conveniently skipping over the part where she had mocked and humiliated me in front of the people I had been killing myself to support. Ashley chimed in next, her texts wild and scattered, jumping from anger to pleading and back again in the span of a few sentences, accusing me of ruining her life, stranding her without a car, putting her and her kid at risk. Like the sudden collapse of her fragile existence was somehow my fault for no longer being willing to prop it up with my own battered hands. She even had the audacity to tell me that family meant sticking together no matter what, ignoring the fact that for years, sticking together had meant me bailing everyone else out while nobody even noticed how far I was sinking. The calls started soon after, dozens of them, from numbers I recognized and some I didn't, and when I made the mistake of answering one, it was Aunt Brenda's voice screeching through the line, thick with fake concern and thinly veiled judgment. "You selfish, spoiled little brat," she snapped, not even bothering with a greeting, her words sharp enough to slice through bone. "Your mother's heart is breaking, and all you can think about is yourself. She's sick, Tyler. Sick. And you just walk out like she's nothing? What the hell is wrong with you?" I hung up before she could say anything else, my hand trembling with rage, and threw the phone across the room where it bounced harmlessly off the second-hand couch. For a long time, I just sat there, breathing heavily, staring at the ugly beige walls of my apartment and feeling the old, familiar guilt sink its claws into me. What if they were right? What if I really was the selfish one, the monster who turned his back on a sick mother, a struggling sister, a broken family, all because my pride had been wounded by a few cruel words? The doubts festered in the quiet, growing bigger and heavier with every passing hour, fueled by the relentless stream of messages and missed calls piling up on my phone. It was so easy to fall back into the old patterns, to let their voices drown out my own, to forget that there had been reasons, good, solid, undeniable reasons for why I had finally snapped and walked away. I thought about driving back, about walking through that front door and pretending it was all a big misunderstanding, smoothing it over the way I always had, taking back the silence I had left them with like a coward taking back a slap. But every time I got close to convincing myself, I remembered the look on Mom's face at that table, the way she had laughed, not with surprise or regret, but with pure, smug cruelty, like hurting me was the funniest thing she had ever done. They wanted me to believe that I had overreacted, that I was weak, cruel, selfish, broken. But the truth, the hard truth that I clung to like a lifeline, was that walking away had been the hardest, strongest, bravest thing I had ever done in my life. And they hated me for it, not because I had hurt them, but because I had stopped letting them hurt me. I was still sitting there, wrestling with all of it, the guilt, the anger, the doubt, when the knock came at the door. A sharp, deliberate knock, not the uncertain tapping of a neighbor or the hurried pounding of someone desperate to get inside, but a steady, patient knock that made my stomach clench with a dread I could not quite name. I rose slowly, heart hammering against my ribs, and crossed the room to peer through the peephole, half expecting to see Ashley or Aunt Brenda or even some neighbor holding a stack of misplaced mail. But it was Dad standing there, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his worn jacket, his shoulders hunched against the cold, his face a mask of something I could not immediately read, not anger, not sadness, but something heavier. Something that looked a lot like shame. For a long moment, I just stared at him, my hand resting on the deadbolt, caught between the old instinct to let him in and the new, fragile resolve to protect myself at all costs. Opening that door felt like more than just a physical act. It felt like a decision, a turning point, a question I was not sure I wanted the answer to. Did I owe him anything? Did I owe any of them anything? The knock came again, softer this time, almost hesitant, and still I hesitated, trapped by the weight of everything that had led to this moment. And then, without even really deciding to, I reached out and unlocked the door. When I opened the door and let Dad step inside, it felt like I had let a whole flood of old ghosts come in with him, ghosts I had spent days trying to leave behind. He stood there for a second, like he wasn't sure if he should really come any further, his hat clutched awkwardly in his hands and his eyes darting around the small, shabby apartment like it was some foreign land he could not quite understand. I just stood there too, waiting, arms crossed over my chest like a shield, feeling the tightness in the room coil up between us, thick enough to choke on. Dad cleared his throat after a long stretch of silence, the same way he always did when he wanted to say something hard, but didn't know where to start. For a second, it almost looked like he was going to turn around and walk right back out the door, and honestly, a part of me hoped he would, because I was not sure I could survive hearing what he had come here to say. Instead, he finally shuffled toward the couch and sat down heavily, like the weight he carried was too much for his legs to hold any longer. I stayed standing because sitting felt too much like forgiveness, and I wasn't ready to hand that out just yet. "Your mom's real upset," he said finally, his voice rough like gravel under boots. "Ashley, too. Whole family's a mess right now." I didn't say anything, just stared at him, waiting for the part where he told me how everything that was happening was my fault, how I had blown things out of proportion, how I needed to grow up and come home and fix the mess I had left behind. He rubbed his hands over his face, looking older than I had ever seen him, older than he had any right to look after all the years he spent sitting back while I carried his share of the weight. When he finally spoke again, his voice was softer, almost pleading. "Family's messy, son," he said, and I could hear the lines rehearsed in his head before they ever made it to his mouth, could hear the years of excuses stacked behind them. "You don't just walk away because it gets ugly. You don't just abandon people when they're hurting." The words hit me harder than I wanted to admit, because even though I knew they were meant to guilt me, some deep, battered part of me still wanted to believe them. Still wanted to believe that family was supposed to mean something more than obligation and sacrifice and hurt. But the anger inside me, the anger I had kept bottled up for so long it had practically become part of my blood, would not let them go unchallenged this time. "You think I don't know family's messy?" I said, my voice rising louder than I intended, louder than I had ever dared to speak around him before. "You think I don't know that already? I've been cleaning up the goddamn mess my whole life while everybody else sat around and watched." Dad flinched like I had hit him, but I didn't stop, couldn't stop, the words spilling out of me like water breaking through a dam. "Where were you when Ashley couldn't pay her rent and came crying to me for help? Where were you when Mom couldn't afford groceries, when the bills piled up, when the house fell apart one rotting piece at a time? Where were you when I was working 2 jobs and still coming home to a broken-down house and a family that looked at me like I was just part of the furniture?" I was shaking by then, fists clenched so tight my nails dug half-moon cuts into my palms, but I could not seem to stop the flood of bitterness and betrayal pouring out of me. "You want to talk about abandonment? I was abandoned a long time ago. I was just too goddamn stupid to realize it." Dad sat there through the whole thing, eyes closed, hands limp on his knees, and for a long time after my voice finally broke and fell into silence, he did not say anything. He just sat there breathing like he was trying to draw enough air into lungs that had long since turned to stone. When he finally spoke, his voice was so low I almost missed it. "I knew," he said, and there was no fight left in it, just a heavy, broken kind of sadness. "I knew you were carrying more than your share. Knew it wasn't right. Knew we should have. I should have done more. Said something. Been better." He looked up at me then, and for the first time in my life, I saw real regret in his eyes, the kind of regret that runs so deep it carves out a hollow space inside you where all the things you should have done used to live. "But I didn't," he said. "Because it was easier to let you do it. Because I was ashamed. Because admitting you were stronger than me, that you were doing the things I should have been doing, was more than my pride could take." I didn't know what to say to that. I had spent so many years dreaming of hearing some kind of apology, some kind of admission, but now that it was here, it just felt sad and empty, like finding a key to a house that had already burned down. We sat in silence for what felt like forever, the air between us thick with all the things that could never really be fixed. And then Dad shifted on the couch, his hands twisting the old baseball cap in his lap. "There's something else," he said, voice rough again, rougher now with the weight of what he was about to say. "Your mom, she's sick, Tyler." The words hit me like a punch to the chest, knocking all the air out of me in one brutal, breathtaking moment. "She's got cancer," he said, looking down at his hands like they might hold some answer he had not found yet. "Been keeping it quiet. Didn't want to worry anyone. Didn't want you kids feeling like you had to. I don't know. Pity her. Help her. She's stubborn that way." I sat back against the wall, the news sinking into me slow and heavy, mixing with the anger and guilt already swirling inside me until I could not tell where one ended and the other began. And just like that, everything got a lot more complicated. The guilt started creeping in almost as soon as the door clicked shut behind Dad, thick and relentless and mean, winding its way through every crack in my mind until there was no room left for the certainty I had clung to so fiercely. I sat in the silence of my apartment for a long time after he left, staring at nothing, listening to the echo of his words bounce around the room like stray bullets. Cancer. Mom was sick. Sick enough that even Dad, who had spent his whole life pretending every problem would solve itself if you just ignored it long enough, could not hide it anymore. At first, I tried to push the thoughts away, telling myself that it changed nothing, that a sick woman could still be cruel, that an illness did not erase years of selfishness and manipulation. But the harder I tried to shove it down, the more it grew, until it filled every corner of my chest with a heavy, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Was I punishing a dying woman by leaving? Was I abandoning her when she needed me the most, proving that everything she had accused me of was true? The questions circled my mind like vultures, picking at whatever scraps of certainty I had left. At night, sleep came in short, broken bursts, and when it did come, it dragged nightmares with it, ugly twisting things full of half-remembered fights and the sound of Mom's laugh turning into a cough that echoed through the empty house. I woke up drenched in sweat more than once, heart pounding, convinced that somewhere, somehow, I had made a mistake I could never fix. During the day, the silence of my new apartment, once so welcome, started to feel like a punishment all its own. Every missed call, every text left unanswered, sat heavy in my phone like little bombs waiting to go off. I told myself that not answering was strength, that not rushing back was the only way I would ever break free, but even that truth started to feel flimsy in the face of everything I did not know. How bad was she really? How much time did she have? What if the last thing I ever said to her, the last memory she ever had of me, was me walking away without looking back? The first real crack came late one night when my phone buzzed against the coffee table and lit up with a message from Ashley. It was short, barely a handful of words, but it hit harder than any of the furious, blame-filled rants she had sent before. Please come back. I'm scared. No punctuation, no demands, just those 6 words sitting there on the screen like a raw nerve. I stared at it for a long time, the coffee in my hand going cold and bitter, and for the first time in days, I felt something crack open inside me. Ashley had never been scared before, not really. Reckless, yes. Entitled, absolutely. But scared? No. If she was scared enough to ask for help, then maybe things were worse than even Dad had admitted. I tried to tell myself it wasn't my problem anymore, that I had made my choice and needed to stick to it, that going back now would only pull me right back into the same old patterns. But no matter how many times I repeated it, the words felt hollow, like a script I no longer believed in. The next morning, I found myself behind the wheel of my truck without even really deciding to be there, the engine rumbling under me, the road stretching out ahead, like a question I did not know how to answer. I told myself I was just going to see, just going to check, not going to stay, not going to get dragged back into the mess I had fought so hard to escape. The drive back to the old house felt longer than it should have, each mile heavy with memories that rose up like ghosts from the cracked pavement. I remembered late nights spent fixing leaking pipes and patching holes in the roof, the endless weekends wasted bailing out problems that were never mine to begin with. I remembered birthday parties where nobody noticed if I showed up or not, holidays where my gifts were an afterthought, my presents a given but never appreciated. And still, even with all that, my hands tightened on the steering wheel the closer I got, heart pounding with a strange, painful mixture of dread and longing. When I finally turned onto the street and saw the house looming in the distance, my stomach twisted into a knot so tight I thought I might actually be sick. From the outside, it looked even worse than I remembered, sagging and tired, the paint peeling in long, sad strips, the porch light hanging at an odd angle like it was ready to give up and fall any second. There was a pile of trash bags stacked by the curb, the mailbox hanging open, and a cracked window covered by a piece of cardboard duct taped into place. It looked like a house that had been abandoned, not by the people living in it, but by hope itself. I pulled up to the curb and killed the engine, sitting there with my hands still gripping the wheel, staring at the broken-down place I had once called home. Part of me wanted to get out, to march up to the door and demand answers, to see for myself how bad things really were. Another part, the quieter part, the part one had been trying to listen to more lately, told me to stay put, to just sit and watch and think before doing anything I could not undo. So I stayed there, sitting in my truck, heart hammering, mouth dry, staring at the house that had taken so much from me and wondering if it was about to take even more. Wondering if I had the strength to walk away again, or if this time, the house, the family, the guilt would pull me under for good. I sat there with the engine ticking quietly as it cooled, the old truck groaning under the weight of a long drive and an even longer stretch of memories that wrapped around me like heavy chains, pulling tighter with every passing second. The broken porch light flickered against the growing darkness, sputtering like a dying firefly, the same damn porch light I had replaced year after year without anyone ever asking, without anyone ever noticing until it went out again. I watched it now, that sad, blinking little thing, and felt like it was a perfect symbol for everything this house had ever been to me, something always on the verge of failing, something I kept fixing just because no one else would. The front door creaked open slowly, and there she was, standing there like a ghost out of a dream I wished I could wake up from. Mom, Linda, thinner now, her shoulders stooped under the invisible weight of a body at war with itself, her hair hanging in limp, tired strands around her face. But the thing that stopped me cold was not the way she looked frail or worn down or even sick. It was the look in her eyes, that same stubborn, prideful fire that had always burned there, daring anyone to pity her, daring anyone to think she needed saving. For a moment, she just stood there, one hand gripping the doorframe like it was the only thing holding her up, staring out at the street as if she could feel me there, even though my truck was hidden half in the shadow of the neighbor's overgrown tree. I wondered if she knew it was me, if she could smell my hesitation on the wind, or if she just stood there every night now, waiting for something or someone that would not come. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles whitening, torn between two tidal forces crashing inside me, neither strong enough to drown the other out. Part of me wanted to throw open the door, run up those cracked steps, wrap her in my arms and tell her that it would be okay, even if it was a lie. Part of me wanted to pick her up and carry her inside, scold her for not telling anyone about the cancer, for being so damned proud even when her body was clearly betraying her. Part of me still wanted to be the son who fixed everything, who made it right just by showing up. But the other part of me, the part that had kept me alive these past few days, the part that had finally learned how to say no, sat rooted in that seat, breathing heavy and slow, reminding me that saving someone who does not want saving only ends one way, with both of you drowning. I sat there, caught in that impossible pull, while the broken porch light flickered and died, casting the front steps into darkness once again. And I realized, with a sick kind of clarity, that no matter what I chose, there would be no victory here. No grand reconciliation, no Hollywood ending where everyone cried and apologized and learned to love better. There was only pain on either side of the choice, only different flavors of it. Maybe forgiveness was not about marching back into the fire with open arms. Maybe forgiveness was about standing outside it, letting it burn without throwing yourself onto the pyre. Maybe it was about saying, I love you, but I cannot be the one to save you, and living with the hollow space that decision leaves behind. She shifted on the porch, wrapping her arms around herself, looking smaller than I had ever seen her, and for the first time, I wondered if maybe she had always been small. If maybe all that pride and anger had just been armor she wore to keep the world from seeing how scared she really was underneath it all. And for the first time, I felt something close to peace threading its way through the sadness, the anger, the guilt. I could forgive her. I could even love her still. But I did not have to let her break me to prove it. The old truck shuddered when I turned the key, the engine rumbling back to life, loud in the still evening air. For a heartbeat, Mom's head jerked up, her eyes scanning the street, searching for the source of the sound. I knew that if I stepped out right now, if I called her name, she would come to me, or maybe she would not, maybe she would just turn and go back inside, proud to the last. Either way, it would change everything, for better or worse. I sat there, the gearshift trembling under my hand, the truck idling and the future wide open in front of me, two roads branching from this moment, and no map to tell me which one was right. I could stay. I could get out of this truck, walk up those steps, step back into the life that had nearly smothered me. I could take her hand, walk her back inside, and patch things together one more time, even if it meant losing myself all over again. Or I could drive away. I could leave this place behind, carry the guilt and the grief with me into a life that was finally, painfully, beautifully mine. The decision hung there, thick and heavy, filling up the cab of the truck until I could barely breathe around it. My hand moved almost without my permission, sliding the gear into drive, the old vehicle jerking forward just a little as it strained against the brakes. And then, in that moment between going and staying, between forgiveness and freedom, between the past and the terrifying unknown of the future, the story ended. Which way I turned, well, maybe that is not the part that matters. Maybe the real story was never about whether I stayed or left. Maybe it was just about finally realizing that, for the first time in my life, the choice was mine to make.